Hello, is this on? All right. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to International Media Leaders, What the Future Holds. I'd like to ask you all, if you haven't already, to find your seats and just to make sure your cell phones are turned off so we can get started. As Fern said, my name is Chris Pethiger. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for the Canadian Programmatic Marketplace. We're a division of TC Media, and it's our extreme pleasure to be with you today and to be sponsoring What the Future Holds. Throughout this session, we'll be hearing from top media leaders about the direction of global production and development. Our speakers will share their insights on what content is becoming more relevant and valuable to the global marketplace. We'll explore, among other things, the ongoing transformation from traditional to digital formats and whether broadcasters are not only keeping on top of it, but offering their audiences alternative formats for viewing content. Our parent company, TC Media, is a Canadian omni-channel and multi-platform marketing solutions company. And I'd just like to take a minute to explain why this session is so important to us. We're probably best known to many of you as one of North America's largest printers of paper. We print newspapers like the Globe and Mail, La Presse, the San Francisco Chronicle, and literally hundreds of small to medium-sized local newspapers. In addition, we're also known, we also own, operate, and publish books, flyers, and national magazine brands like Canadian Living, Style at Home, and Elle Canada. So in our case, traditional media means a lot of paper. And the shift to digital is a challenge that's really very much at the heart of our business today. Thank you all for your time and for attending this session. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our session moderator, Peter Sussman, Executive Director of Aver Media Finance, a part of Bank of Montreal, to begin this very important session. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Hello, it's working? Yeah. Hi, everybody, welcome. So I'll begin by introducing everybody. Down at the end is Jeremy Butteriss. Jeremy joined Google, I guess, about 2 years ago. 3.5, close enough. And I guess that includes YouTube as well, your scope of your role. And before that, Jeremy worked at Rogers, heading up broadband entertainment initiatives. In fact, I think I read that you were the first guy to launch the Television Everywhere program in Canada. So clearly a guy who's making tracks. Beside him is Walter Levitt. Walter works for an outfit in America called Comedy Central, owned by Viacom. He's the Chief Marketing Officer. Remind me, Walter, you joined a couple years ago, three years ago? 3 years ago. And is quite a celebrated media executive, and of course now brings, in addition to his previous years at Alliance Atlantis, a perspective on what's going on in the United States. Beside him is a guy, John...
Morayniss?
Morayniss. John Morayniss. John and I used to work together. In fact, I was thinking the other day, 5 of us here used to be at Alliance Atlantis. Anyway, John runs E1 Television, which has been extraordinarily successful. And I described you, John, the other day as just about the leading independent television executive in the world. Somebody said I was crazy.
I'll agree with that.
Yeah. Anyway, and beside John is Kirstine Stewart. Kirstine, of course, many of us here know from her great years at the CBC and is now running Twitter Canada. Very curious to hear what you have to say about Twitter. And then beside her is Peter Schube. Peter has worked at and now runs for many years the Jim Henson Company, one of the of course most celebrated companies in our business. And beside him is Barb Wiliams. And Barb is in charge of content at Shaw Media here in Canada and touches all their specialty channels in the global network and is in charge of acquisitions and programming and quite the veteran executive. With all that, or now that we're done that, let's go on to the panel. They've asked me about Q&A. My suggestion is just Q&A as we go. If anybody has a question, just yell out, put up your hand. There's mics apparently somewhere out here. So please ask questions as you go. I'm going to start with, we're meant to talk about content and the future of content, and I'm not clear what content is to folks like Twitter and Google. I'm going to start with Twitter, Kirstine. I know you've said that Twitter can be a great friend to existing channels in broadcasting and expanding the scope of their audience. So that, to me, means working with their content. So I wasn't sure if Twitter's in the content business or not. Can you tell us how Twitter touches content?
I think the extent of Twitter being in the content business is actually as that kind of complementary partner. We're the place, I think, for discovery, for navigation, for recommendation, and for delivery. Like, I think what's interesting about what people do in the space is, we've all transformed into a place in time when everybody wants content, when they want it, where they want it, however they want it. And the kind of magic of that 140 characters that at one time just kind of told people where they were going for coffee is now something that technology has allowed a kind of window to content. You can play content within the 140 character space. You can talk about it. You can talk to your favorite star who happens to be tweeting about the show. Like tonight, for example, I know Veep is going live with their season finale chat, on Twitter. So it's a number of things, and I think what we try to do is we're not in the business of creating content in competition with anyone. What we're here to do is create, with partnerships, opportunities for different kinds of content to be discovered and watched on the platform, whether it's the goal from the last night's hockey game, or 2 seconds ago the goal that happened on the hockey game, or whether it's live streaming an entire event within a tweet, or if it's just the kind of background information to get people excited about a show. So there's just lots of ways to work with content on Twitter.
So John, E1 makes a lot of content. Are you working with Twitter?
First of all, I want to know how this panel is trending on Twitter right now.
It better be.
We do. We work, all of our projects have a social media aspect to them. So there's always, in fact, it's becoming more important, more than ever now, to have that. Such a noisy marketplace. There's so many channels, as you know. There's so much competition, so much amazing programming on the air. So now more than ever, we feel, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you just got to get the word out to a very large audience in any way you can. I mean, we just we distributed a show called *Halt and Catch Fire* that just launched on AMC a couple weeks ago, and AMC actually put it on Tumblr a couple weeks before the launch to give a free view, into hoping again to just capture an audience.
Walter, I read that you said that Comedy Central is not a channel. What is it?
First of all, I'm impressed that you did research. Thank you. We don't think of ourselves as a TV network anymore, and I think, as I explain why, you'll understand. We think of ourselves as a comedy brand. And the reason that's important is because we serve primarily young guys, 18 to 34-year-old guys. We know they consume content anywhere content is available. They do still watch a lot of TV, although that's obviously declining as the years go by. But they watch their content anywhere they want to watch their content. Obviously, their phones now being a huge source. And so we thought it was important that we redefined our business. We are already, obviously, we're in the TV business. We're in the digital business. We have our content really on every platform, every digital platform imaginable. We are in the live comedy touring business. We are in the record business, a bunch of other businesses as well. And so our philosophy is, if we think of ourselves as a TV network, we are going to be stuck in the world of how does everything support the TV network. And our objective is making sure, thank you. Sounds like a single, thank you. There you go. So we think of ourselves as a comedy business, a comedy brand, and obviously TV is critically important to our success today and likely for the foreseeable future, but I don't think we have any idea whether it will be in 10, 15, 20 years, and we need to be prepared as a business.
So Barb, Jean Media is in the TV business. Is your view similar to Walter's?
Yeah, one of the ways we tend to think about it is, and Walter and I go back a long way, he's probably going to say this is really his idea, but we used to think of the television network as the center, and then out from that were all the extensions of that TV brand and all the other things you try to do around it. And that's very much shifted now so that the brand itself is in the center and the TV network is just one of the spokes that goes out from it. It no longer is the center of it. And we would say we're, to a great degree, we're in the lifestyle business. You may be in the comedy business, we're in the lifestyle business. And we have a number of TV brands that are around that circle and a number of other ways that we see our lifestyle content on our digital platforms and in lots of other ways that content exists and our brand exists. So it is an evolution, and Twitter is part of us understanding how that brand hits other people. Twitter is pre-current and post our brand. I say it's a pre-marketing effort. It's very much a current piece of a show being enjoyed in the moment, and then it's a post-analysis tool for our viewers to keep them engaged in the next thing. So all of these pieces are all important to us in terms of being successful with our audiences.
I may have this wrong, but I thought when I checked, I believe that Shaw Media had 4,000 Facebook friends, which surprised me. Did I get that right? It struck me as a very low number.
I don't know.
Oh, anyway, assuming it's accurate.
Thanks, Peter. Who knows?
Well, it just.
Zach, do you know?
Well, brands don't often.
That's
Brands don't
what
have them,
appeared to
shows
be.
have
Yeah,
them.
no, that's right.
Yeah, brands don't have them, the shows have them.
Say it again, sorry?
Yeah,
Brands don't have them, the shows.
I understand,
have them.
but
Yeah,
still,
yeah.
it still surprised me.
Like ET Canada has bazillions.
Like my son has an
it
Instagram
depends, right?
page
There
with
you go.
13,000 followers. I just thought Shaw might have had more.
Start a channel.
Oh,
But
Nice.
but
nice.
This is getting good.
but Peter, I checked the Jim Henson Company, and I think you have 38,000. Did I read that right?
Well, at least you beat Peter's son, thank God. Yeah.
3-1, I should add. We look at it in the aggregate. We look at it across all social media platforms because our shows have, a larger footprint on social media than our company does. We have individual brands, Dark Crystal, Farscape, that have hundreds of thousands of aggregated social media followers.
But interestingly, the Jim Henson Company is probably one of the only brands in the business.
It's one of the few left that's independent and privately owned, certainly.
But that's interesting. So you're telling me most of the concentration of social media by the company is done on the shows, not the company itself, even though
Yeah.
the brand is so.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just that's what people connect to. That's what they attach themselves to. Is
And
an
you have to-
individual
And
property.
drill that down even further, like it's a star that they attach themselves to, and then a show title, and then maybe a concept, and then maybe a channel, and then and it layers all the way up. And if you accumulate all of those opportunities for people to engage, it's enormous. But it isn't just in one place.
Jeremy, tell us about Google. Again, kind of like my initial question to Kirstine, I'm not clear on Google's role in content.
And Walter, I didn't bring my plant, so I don't think I'll get applause mid-comment. It's similar. The way I think about it and frame it is that Google builds platforms for information and content. Our search engine is that, connecting billions of users to trillions or more of websites. YouTube is very similar, connecting millions of creators and now channels and broadcasters, you name it, also to a billion consumers. So I think the best way to think of Google is a platforms company that makes connections from many to many.
But are YouTube channels any different than the traditional specialty channels in Canada?
Absolutely.
They are different.
Yeah.
And how would they differ?
Well, so I'd say first and foremost, what we're observing, and I've talked about this before, is just a massive shift towards hyper niche content. We all remember when cable came along and made it a lot easier to reach audiences and provide niche content with lower distribution costs. The same has happened again on the internet. The difference is now there's 1 billion people in certain forums on the internet and lower production and distribution costs. So there's an entire reinvention of content going on in any genre that you talk about. There are now sub-niches and sub-niches of those. Gaming, which was has always been a big niche in YouTube, usually number 2 behind music. There's now sub-niches to the point, I think it's Dota 2, the live finale of watching people play that game against each other has larger prize pool than the Masters golf tournament and higher viewership than many tier 1 or even tier 2 sports in the US. So it's a reinvention of content. It's also a reinvention has been discussed, of user engagement. So increasingly, whether it's creators or channels or multi-channel networks, they're engaging with users in fundamentally different ways. They're asking them to contribute content. They're doing hangouts with the stars and their fans. They're bringing their, just like we heard the traditional media players, they're also thinking not just as YouTube channels. Vice, a great Canadian success story now valued over $1 billion, has a very robust website outside of YouTube with as much text content as they do video.
Does Google spend any money on developing content?
We did spend money a couple of years ago to invest in content companies. My analogy there is similar to when Apple launched the iPhone. There were no apps, so they partnered with John Doerr and created $1 billion fund. So, sorry, 100 million. We did something similar to really just accelerate things. We've also built a few studios around the world. But beyond that, the best way to think of us is a platform rather than the channels. Now, to your question, there is a supply chain on YouTube now. There are creators. In some cases, there are channels that rev share with those creators or even license the content. In some cases, there are multi-channel networks. Machinima operates over 100 channels. So does Vivo, the music channel. So there definitely is a value chain. There are people licensing content in the YouTube ecosystem.
So I'll stop repeating the questions with you, but one last one. So just to be crystal clear, would people come to Google if they have a great idea for content?
I think the best thing they could do is start. Just start producing content and learning. But we have a vast amount of resources to help people. So whether that's sounds trivial, but our playbook, which has thousands and thousands of insights around creation and distribution, whether it's our partner managers around the world, we definitely are there to help and provide.
So people should pitch Google their great ideas. Kirstine, should people pitch Twitter? I guess
I
not.
think you said no.
They should pitch me,
I'll get to you.
and I will
Or me.
sell.
I'll get to you guys in a sec.
There's
I'll
plenty
get-
of people to
Done.
pitch up here.
It's Jeremy. I think what Jeremy's saying is, the new reality, and particularly in this digital space, it's, creators create. And platforms aren't there to be gatekeepers anymore. Like, I think there's a difference between a network and a platform, or a network and a stream of media. There's huge opportunity in what you can now do as an individual creator. It's so true about, things that were not considered to be content, like just a year or two ago, are completely dominating.
Give me an
some of
example.
the digital space. Well, I think Jeremy's example of people. There are whole channels where people are watching other people play video games, and these channels have great value, and they're hugely watched, and they actually create YouTube stars out of those people who I was at. My daughter is a huge fan of Minecraft. She's a 13-year-old girl, and she decided her one trip she wanted to take was down to Minecon, which, if you know Comic-Con, there's a Minecon. So we went down to Minecon in Florida. These guys walk into the room, and they get swarmed. And who are these guys? They're the guys on YouTube who play Minecraft, and everybody watches. And they were being swarmed for autographs, and everybody knew their name. It's a different, I think we have to open our mind around what people will watch and engage with. And I think there's different places for all different forms of content. And I think, sometimes, particularly within our borders, we get a little traditional around what is content nowadays, when people are telling you otherwise.
So again, just to be very specific, should people in this room, if they have a good idea, call you up and say, I want to come tell Twitter about my great idea?
They make their great idea, and then they come talk to us.
So, okay. And is it possible, though, that the Twitter influence on a certain idea, and I don't know what it would be so significant that you might say, yes, we should go together to Barb, because our involvement in this idea will enhance, or to Walter, will so enhance the opportunity, they got to hear it from us jointly.
I still think you're thinking of the flow in the traditional way.
Yeah. Well, most of this room does, so
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
picking at this.
It's I think it goes every which way. It's multi-directional now. I think there's going to be opportunities where traditional media is going to come to the digital space and start something. It is no longer this kind of chain of one thing, like what Barb was saying. It's no longer a chain of you start with television in the middle and then go out. you start with a great idea and you figure out naturally what platform is the best home for that and develop it and make it, and then you see where it goes.
Right, it really is all about brands, right? It's like, you know, if something's trending.
I didn't ask you a question yet.
Oh, damn it!
But he's agreeing with me. He's allowed to
I'm
talk.
agreeing with Twitter
John,
and Google.
John, do you have something to say?
No.
Please tell us.
Well, what's interesting is it's all about brands. So these YouTube stars.
You tell us what it is. We'll decide if it's interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
God, I hope this is trending on Twitter really, really badly right now. What's interesting is, as a studio, we are looking at what is happening on Twitter, what's happening on a lot of these platforms, these online platforms, whether it's Wattpad or on a multi-channel network. These YouTube stars are really interesting now because conventional networks are now looking at these YouTube stars and they're actually putting them, or they're starting to put them, and they're developing shows around them. So there is so much crossover that's going on right now between sort of what I would call a new media, which really doesn't exist, it's just media now, but the traditional media space. But at the end of the day, whether you're a broadcaster or you're a studio in the traditional space, all you really care about right now is what are the brands out there that I think I can attach myself to that ultimately will create value throughout that chain, that orderly marketplace, whether it's launching on a multi-channel network, whether it's launching on Fox, it's launching on Global. It's, you know, again, to Barb's point and everyone else's point on the panel, everyone's desperate now for just a really solid brand that can speak to a specific audience, that can hopefully ultimately be monetized in some way.
Is that really any different? Years ago, everybody wanted a brand. The point was there was less traffic, less noise, less competition, so the emphasis on brand was muted. But still, if you had a fantastic book, that was easier to sell to a traditional broadcaster. Why? Because the book was well known, it already had an audience. You know, all it is the same thing today. I fight this new media thing. I don't sort of buy it. Meaning, I get it. It's different components. It's different paths to opportunity. But it's, let me say it this way. I've heard someone told me about this concept of transmedia. And I said, well, what is transmedia? And they said, oh, it's when you take a piece of content and you commercialize it in multiple different ways. I said, look, I promise you, 25 years ago, there was a meeting at Disney in the boardroom where they talked about The Lion King, and there were 30 people sitting around the table, and 2 people were there for plush toys, and 1 was there for bags, and 1 was whatever it is. You know, and now you're telling me there's 6 more seats in that room. Okay, I got it. There's more ways, more different ways. You know, and what am I missing? Are things really that different, or am I right that it's kind of the same, just more complicated and more paths? Anybody want to fight me or agree with me on that? Peter, why don't you?
I think it's about reliably delivering an audience, and that's traditionally what a brand can do. And it's not that much different from how television began, with the Westinghouse Theater and those sorts of brand-centered content experiences that were valuable to the outlets that existed at the time, simply because they could reliably deliver an audience. And it's the same thing now.
Yeah,
It's
or-
certainly the same thing for my company.
Or more simply put, to me it's about you make a piece of content and you should try and commercialize it for more than it cost. And hopefully a lot more than it costs.
That would be good.
Is it any different?
I think it is, although I do think, you know, the difference is not, you know, the whole transmedia, that's just a buzzword, which I think will come and go very quickly. I do think there are a couple of fundamental differences today. Excuse me. One is there are just more ways for the content to get into the hands of consumers, way more ways than there were even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And so the idea that it has to start, to Barb's point, has to start on a linear TV channel and expand from there, that's simply not true anymore. I mean, I was at the Google YouTube New Front, and, you know, they throw out stats about how, you know, more 18 to 34-year-olds watch YouTube than all cable channels in the US combined. I don't know if it's true, but that's sort of the line they use. So there are many different ways to get the content to consumers. And I also think, as a result, there's also way more content. In fact, I would argue sometimes if you go to YouTube, there's too much content. Like, there's just so much stuff there that, frankly, no one is ever going to watch. And so I think...
Those cute cats, though, are amazing.
Yeah, there you go, they are. Gotta love cats. I think, you know, I think to your point, I think the role of brands has always been central to the content experience. I think it's sort of, you know, it's evolved certainly over time. I believe now that in a world where you have 18 billion choices of content in front of you, you're never going to find stuff unless there's someone you trust to help you find it. And that's the role of brands. Always has been, I think even more important now.
If I can just add a couple of thoughts. I think you're hitting on an important insight. You know, at the ground level here, not much has changed. You have to, you know, create content, find an audience, engage with them, and then, like you said, find other ways to make money from that. I think the difference is Walter touches on is the pace, the options, and the specifics in how that is done. It's much more iterative and real time. You know, people are experimenting as they go. That's why I said earlier, just get started is the best thing to do. Similarly, the way they're engaging with audience is much less through intermediaries, and it's much more real. You know, Hangouts through Google Plus are something that a lot of people are doing, for example. So it's not the fundamentals of the content industry. It's more the means of distributing, the ways to engage audience, and the need to constantly iterate and change. And I want to reinforce, you know, we're in the very early stages here of if this is new media. I like that point. You know, YouTube's viewership, video view hours, grew 50% last year. We're now seeing 40% of our viewership on mobile devices. Our founders are working on a world where we barely use keyboards. You know, aside from drafting long emails or presentations, we probably won't use keyboards in a few years. So much change is still happening. I think it's important to realize that, you know, to the point earlier about the masses of content out there, we did a partnership with DreamWorks where they're now actually curating content for us and creating kind of best of lists. So there's lots of innovation still to come.
They're not dissimilar to the phenomenon now of Netflix and, you know, different forms of what, you know, our distribution for content. You know, we're in a world now where some content will never ever touch a traditional platform and be very, very successful. I think, you know, one of the big challenges we have right now is trying to figure out measurement, trying to figure out how to monetize that. You know, if you're aggregating from a number of different sources, as you are, you know, how do you put that together in a way that tells a story that then can turn into, you know, it's just so much more of a complicated world where you used to be able to sell one rating to one group of advertisers, and now you have, you know, opportunities where great content with millions of viewers might never touch a traditional platform to be measured in the way that it has been for the last 50 years.
Sorry, Barb, go
Well, it's just, it strikes me, Peter, because I totally agree with you, and I found myself arguing that point mostly to myself. But I hear you totally.
People think you're nuts when you say
they
it.
kind of, and they just think you're old.
Yeah,
It's mostly
that
what
too.
they think. But you know, to me, it's an example would be thinking that e-commerce. And because I think this, e-commerce, like what's the big deal about e-commerce? That's just the Sears catalog. And it is. I mean, it's sort of the same analogy, but it's the complexity and the pace that has somehow made e-commerce nothing like the Sears catalog when it comes right down to it. And the complexity and the pace has made what it sort of blows apart your analogy too, because actually it just doesn't work that way anymore, even though on some philosophical level, it's just the same as it's always been.
I agree with that, but there's also, let's see what Amazon ends up doing. To the extent they're able to marry their content delivery platform with their commerce platform.
With the
That may
catalog.
be a game changer that's going to ruin the rest of our lives, actually.
I agree. I think it's the platform side of it is really complicated, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you're in the platform business, you know, I think you get up every morning, you have no idea how the day's going to end. If you're in the content business, i.e., the idea of creating, exploiting,
You don't care.
You kind of don't care. I'm platform agnostic. I mean, I love Global and Google and Twitter and Jim Henson, but I really am content agnostic, really. And to your point, you're absolutely right. This is kind of the same business. I really want to create great content that will capture eyeballs that I can monetize. It's just way more complicated now. The process has become way more complicated. It's exciting because the barriers to entry are really, you know, have gone away. Anyone can become a star. Almost anyone can create something and get it to an audience, and it can find an audience before, you know, the gatekeepers aren't what they used to be. So that's kind of exciting. But to monetize it and actually figure out a way to create awareness for your show is getting harder and harder because it's noisier and noisier. So the process is changing dramatically.
I say the content is even changing. Like to your analogy about the book, here's a great book, therefore. So what's the great book in the kids who are playing the video games that are getting more viewers than that book movie ever will get?
Yeah, it's just
Like,
another
it's
way of popularizing
you know,
something.
now the content, the scope of it is so broad. It's like, then what is content? You know, how do people know what people are going to watch when that's moving and changing? You know, that scope, we can't be precious anymore about what content is because people are deciding what's valuable by watching it.
When you talk about on this theme of, is it too much content? Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, I read YouTube adds 72 hours of new videos every minute.
I stopped quoting that stat because it changes every.
It's probably more now. And 4 billion video downloads a day. Is that close to accurate?
That's about right. I think it's 5. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, I find that.
Half are in
Well,
my
we have- I
house,
mean-
I think.
We have our own live example, right? So you may have heard of these guys, Key and Peele. We launched them 3.5 years ago, and we actually, before we ever launched as a TV show, we actually, even though we were in the middle of a lawsuit, we quietly met with the guys from Google and said, we need you. We need YouTube to help launch these guys. And we did a very comprehensive launch, really, of their content. It was content-driven. It wasn't full 22-minute content, but shorter content, and a bunch of original content for YouTube. And these guys have now become, they're big stars, period. But they've now, I don't remember the most recent number. I think something like 300 million views of their content on YouTube, which, by the way, is way more views than they've ever had on linear TV. And that's a huge success for us. And that's because, particularly millennials, that is, if you want a piece of content to be seen widely and you want it to be shared, which is so critical in the comedy business, the place millennials share content is YouTube, period.
And it's interesting
And
because there's
on
no,
this theme, sorry, I just wanted to finish. On the theme of change that we're all talking about, there are unexpected opportunities. So our companies have an interesting history, and one thing that came out of that was our Content ID system, which is essentially a copyright management system. This is basically content creators upload their content, and we search every bit of that content, the 72 or 90 or whatever hours per minute, and match it all and return any matches to the owner, and they decide what to do with it. This system won an Emmy Award last year and has delivered tens of millions to the industry. I know at least a couple of my partners here on the panel are active users and making healthy revenue streams. So now the idea is the user is the broadcaster, and they're doing the marketing on your behalf, and you get to keep all the revenue. So there's just so much innovation happening.
So I gotta say, Peter, I listened to all this, and it's sort of a miracle that I have a job, you know? Like, you hear all this, and you kind of wonder, like, it's a surprise that broadcasting even still exists. And yet, I know that the vast amount of time that people are still spending with their screens is on commercial television, on commercial content on established channels. And that even in our good old-fashioned broadcasting business, still, 80-85% of viewing is done live on the couch in front of the TV. So I sometimes have a hard time reconciling all this. Like, your numbers are massive and mind-boggling. I'm still hanging in there with 3 million people watching NCIS Tuesdays at 8, and making money at it.
And why is that? Because that's where the dollars still are.
It's where the dollars are, and because there's something still very populist about a mass audience enjoying just good entertainment. And I expect that we'll have hundreds of meetings in these next 4 days between the executives here from Shaw Media and the producers in the room who want to be a part still of that ecosystem because they still see the value in it. So it's interesting to me how it's all coexisting somehow, still, sorta, and I only need a couple more years.
Yeah. Hang in there, Barb.
Retiring at 40, Barb?
Thank you.
We've got your back.
So I think notwithstanding everything we've just said for the last half hour, now we're all saying keep doing it the same, be mindful of what's out there. Yes, figure out more clever ways to find ideas. It isn't just a book. Find somebody who's being celebrated on YouTube, bring them to a show. Be mindful of what Twitter can do for you. Be mindful. But still come up with stories that are a hour format, maybe 2 hour in some case. Is that still the best advice?
It's changing.
What does that mean?
It means that that's probably where you're still going to make the most money, but it's changing, and I think it's changing rapidly. And I think that if we're sitting here next year, still working, I think we'll be talking about the fact that, short form content has really taken a foothold. Again, to Barb's point, right now, the reason that these shows are working is this ecosystem. We're still getting good license fees from traditional broadcasters. We're making these shows, but it's changing, and we know. We're hearing about broadcasters, hurting, about margins being compressed. There's fragmentation in the marketplace. I know that. We sell a show like Walking Dead internationally in France. We'll window it out five times over like 3 years. So every license fee is going down, but overall the aggregate's going up. So it's exciting for us as a content exploiter, but I'm telling you, these platforms that, right now we're thinking, aren't really able to monetize, they're starting to monetize. I mean, just look how fast Netflix has sort of increased its subscriber base on a global basis. And I think that for Canadians especially, I think the key thing going forward, if we're going to be in the content business, is we have to start thinking more globally. We can't just look at this domestic market anymore. And if you look at networks around the world, they're starting to expand outside of their domestic territory because they're seeing that's the way they actually can make money. Content is great, but you got to figure out a way to monetize it.
And how fast it changes, because when, I think when I was thinking about coming to this panel and what the subject was, and I thought about, I wasn't at BAMP last year, because that's when I'd made the change from CBC to Twitter. All the other panels I'd been on before, whether it was for CBC or Alliance Atlantis or whomever, we talked about this change coming. Here it's going to come, and I remember people saying, "Oh, no one's ever going to watch content on the cell phone. No one's ever going, who's ever going to watch anything longer than 2 seconds on that?" And I remember at the CBC when I'd licensed some of the Canadian shows to Netflix for the first time, few years ago, 2-3 years ago maybe. And I remember getting, letters from carriers saying, "What are you doing?" Things have moved and changed so fast. We have to be everywhere. I think, there was a bit of hesitance around exploring new things. And I think to John's point, we have to now look at what that model looks like in terms of sustainability, because margins are getting smaller and smaller. Broadcasters. The last time I was at a broadcaster, it was certainly getting, it was getting tough, and it gets tougher all the time. And I think there are, in this kind of global space, and with so much coming at people in so many different ways, the business model has completely changed.
Peter, you seem
I was
to...
going to say, in the kids space, at least internationally, and when I say that, I mean not internationally, from an American's point of view, the platforms are starting to run into each other. And what some of the broadcasters, specifically around Europe, some of the public broadcasters and the large private ones, are starting to try and beat back the invasion by the new platforms by grabbing those rights themselves, either through expanded catch-up TV rights or on a defensive basis. And it's starting to have an economic impact, actually, because those rights are very valuable. They sit alongside the pay or the DVD rights, theoretically, and the linear broadcasters are now trying to grab those as well, and it's a problem. The platforms are colliding.
And I can't help but pick up on John's comment. I love both of your points. In the first, there are tremendous opportunities for Canadians here to now go after a global audience. Watch Mojo is coming out of Montreal. They're the #6 global channel on YouTube. Some of the top fashion stars come from Canada. So rather than just think about protecting and defending the traditional business, I think it's great. A lot of people, including E1, are going after a global business. But also, the other point you made is an important one. I think it's important not to have false validation from a lack of dramatic change. We talked about e-commerce earlier. I was on a project for Sears in 1999 about turning their catalog business into the Amazon of the North. And they didn't do it, and 2 years later they celebrated and said, "See, aha, e-commerce still less than 1%." You watch what happens to traditional retailers that haven't innovated this year. Now that Amazon's doubled their number of distribution centers in Canada. I'm not Chicken Little. I remind the 20-somethings I work with that there are still very many profitable radio stations in this country. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I think it's important to not assume that there hasn't been a massive cliff yet. It doesn't mean that there isn't massive change and a flow of dollars going to digital in the next year or two.
We have a question, I think. Is that right? Yes.
I just wanted to ask the question.
Is that mic on? Maybe?
Okay. I just wanted to ask a question about screen time, because I know I actually have a marketing background, and I know traditional marketing is all about television, but now there's so many more screens that consumers are watching. So, you know, when you said you have 3 million consumers that are still watching that program at that certain time, do you have statistics on how many other hours a day they're watching screens? Because I think that's what's happening. The screen time's really broadening, so it's creating almost more opportunity for, from a marketing perspective. It's slowly being built up, but potentially there should be opportunity to make money in all of the different platforms.
Barb,
Yeah, sure. I'm going to misquote this. 7 hours, I think, a day people are spending with screens, and half of that is with commercial content, like content that has ads in it. But you're right, the screen time's just huge. I think from our point of view, two thoughts. One goes back to something Kirstine mentioned a couple minutes ago, which is at the root of our challenge, we think right now, is the ability to both measure and then monetize. If we could actually measure every person who watched NCIS after 7 days on the PVR or on VOD, or God forbid, illegally downloaded or whatever else, you know, that number would be even, you know, would be twice the size that it is. And if we could truly measure all that and then monetize all that, the adoration for traditional content is massive. We just are, at the moment, only managing to capture a small slice of it. I think the other point I'd make, totally off topic, but just because I now have the mic, is when John talks about, you know, we need to go global. Again, as a Canadian broadcaster living in a territory with very specific rules, regulations, and boundaries, I wonder what's in it for us. How do we go global?
Own content? Share in the ownership of content? I mean,
Yes.
networks around the world, that's what they're doing.
And I
They're
think,
partners.
yeah, so
They're
these are the
partners.
conversations that need to happen, back to the get in the hallways and talk about stuff thing.
The other statistic that's interesting too is around, you know, screen time is increasing for sure. So is screen time on multiple screens and multiple screens at the same time, right? Like that's what, you know, Twitter kind of builds its television relationship on, is something like 57% of Canadians are tweeting, 57% of people on Twitter in Canada are tweeting during a show. Something like 85% of Canadians overall have a tablet or a smartphone with them when they're watching television. So there's multiple things going on at the same time, and I think, you know, the question around, does that change the half-hour, 1 hour, 2 hour format? And you're seeing it change. There's a 6-second format called Vine that is going crazy. That's the Twitter video platform, and again, you know, huge Canadian stars on it. Like this, it's, you know, things, people are, you know, that there's so much opportunity in so many different ways that screen time has no longer looks like something up on a wall, and I think we've known that for a while, but how much of it is shifting to that mobile use is incredible.
And that short form content has the opportunity to go viral way,
yeah, really
you know,
fast.
more effectively.
Yeah,
So it's,
yeah. We've even, Twitter's done a deal with Xbox, where Vine has a channel on Xbox. It's the first time you can take your Vine from, you know, it used to be a very kind of mobile or desktop kind of platform. Now it's thrown up on a television screen.
I will say, you know, one of the things that I often get asked is the difference between working in the US and Canada, having spent 20 years in the industry here, and that's a whole other session. But there's one thing that actually I find fascinating when I stop and think about it, and that is, to the question a little bit, how things get measured, or what is measured. And right, so I remember every day, you know, working at Alliance Atlantis and Can West, you know, we would get the ratings every day. That would be sort of the moment of the day. We'd either be really ecstatic or really upset, and then we'd move on. Well, the single report that we get every day at Comedy Central includes what were the live ratings, what were the live same-day ratings, what happened last night on Twitter, what happened last night on Facebook, what are our YouTube views looking like, what's happening on VOD, what's happening on well, not so much Netflix these days, but Amazon Prime. We're off Netflix for a little while, and every other platform. So we actually look, the report card, if you will, the daily report card assumes the business is much more than linear TV. And that is a real difference, I think, and maybe that has changed here, but I think that kind of gets to the crux of it, which is all that content is being measured. The issue right now is it's not one measurement. I've been the one in the US saying you need PPMs in the US, right? Because theoretically that technology could measure it all in one platform or in one way. But it's all being measured, and I think, we certainly look at all of them every day. Advertisers would love to be able to buy one measurement across the board, and I think that's where, as an industry, we have to get to.
And Barb, is it, to answer Walter's inquiry, is it changing in Canada too,
Oh,
that way?
absolutely, absolutely. And there's a lot of conversation happening, I think, across the entire industry about how do we get some sort of common understanding of measurement, and so that we can turn to our advertiser and give them the whole story and the whole opportunity. It could really change things. We got so many things happening at once, so technology's on its sort of track. Consumers are actually far ahead of all of us, and creatively, actually, there's still an enormous amount of heart for that longer form that writers and directors and talent still love very much to be a part of. So it's kind of bringing all those different things together.
How much will, I guess this is more for Jeremy and Kirsten, this movement to protect privacy, the decision in Europe this last week or the week before, movements here in Canada, the same thing. Is that rising becoming something more important?
Yeah, it's obviously a big topic at Google.
Everyone
these
knows what I'm
days.
talking about. That Google shouldn't be allowed to play with your privacy and can share mailing lists and contact and all that kind of thing.
Sorry, I thought you were referring to in Europe. They asked us to act as an intermediary in the internet and
No, I thought it was.
and take down content.
It was a case in Europe, went to the highest court, where a guy said, this 15-year-old piece that said that I didn't pay my taxes and lost my house. Google's not allowed to keep that up. I deserve my privacy, and they agreed.
Well, and I'll remind you, Google doesn't create web pages. We have a directory to the web, so that's where the issue is. It's so touchy. Should Google be in effect censoring the web or not? And us making judgment calls of what should be found and what should not. And I think that's the challenge. I will say Google is very adamant about user privacy. The encryption steps we've taken to user data in the last couple of years has been a tremendous effort at the company. I think the topic of privacy is a very important one right now in terms of who accesses your data, whether we're talking about governments or others, and how the data is used, certainly.
And Kirsten, at Twitter?
All of our organizations, whether it's Google or Facebook or Twitter, a number of other ones, we work together in order to ensure that privacy is protected. I think the most telling thing to me when I joined Twitter and I went down to the San Francisco office is like emblazoned on the walls are kind of the values of Twitter, including reach every person on the planet. There's also defend the user's voice and protect the user's voice. And I think whether it was what's been happening in other countries around the world or what happens here, I think everyone's very mindful. The difference with Twitter, Google is a search platform. Twitter is a platform on which people put information or content or conversation that is open to be seen to everyone anyway. Like you kind of understand that when you're getting on Twitter, what you say is going to be discovered by everybody because you're putting it out to the world. So beyond what you put out to the world, everything that you don't is private and is your information, and we work to protect that.
We have a question apparently back here.
Hi there. My name is Mike. I'm a small-scale content producer in Toronto. There was a lot of discussion earlier about branding, and I'm just curious to hear the panel's opinion on how the landscape is changing in regards to risk, who's assuming risk within the industry. Because as a small-time content creator, it definitely feels like in this content-heavy world, the financial risk is falling on us as creators to build brand and audience, and then come to you as distributors and producers.
Anybody want to field that?
Sure, I will. You're partly right. I certainly notice because, I wear a number of hats. E1 is a studio. We're a distributor. We're also a producer and a developer. And we do note, especially in the high-end content world, that the broadcasters are looking to us to spend more time developing, more time packaging, more time putting something together and then handing it off in a way that you've never seen before. I think Netflix certainly changed the rules a little bit. I mean, House of Cards was an example of a show that really was put together and packaged. by MRC and then brought to Sony, and it was really almost put together like an independent feature. So I think you're seeing that more and more in the TV space, is that it's kind of being put together the way independent features are put together. So there's definitely sort of a general trend that you as a creator are looked upon to sort of deliver more and put more together. You know, E1, we've actually stepped up dramatically in the money we spend on development for that very reason. We realize the development process is the most crucial part of the content value chain. If you don't have something good, it doesn't matter what platform it's on, you know, what the demographic is, even what the initial license fee you may or may not get for your show. Ultimately, it's just going to go away. So the development process is important, and it's worth the investment and the time.
And certainly my advice is make it easy for your buyers. So yes, it should fall on your shoulders. You should do it, and you should just make it as easy as possible for your buyers so they have nothing to say but yes. There was a question down front here.
Hi. Is this on? Yeah, it's on. Sorry. Going back to Walter, you were talking a couple of minutes ago about the scorecard or the report card that you look at with the data across different channels. Question from my point of view, and it's great to have this panel together, is what are you doing with that when you get it, when you look at it? Because what we're talking about here, Barb, I was just at the upfronts last week, great shows coming from Shaw. Media buyers are all there to look at those shows and buy against those shows on your channels. But what's important to the advertisers, I think, and I'm speaking on behalf of all of them, is the ability to move and manipulate the audience based on the data that you're getting. So it's not working, we're not getting enough traffic in Twitter, let's move it. Is it working on YouTube? Let's put more money behind that. So it's the ability to change in real time as opposed to buying against a show in a block for a year or buy against a show that you don't know what the ratings are going to be. I think that's what makes it exciting when we're talking about monetizing, and that's the flexibility the advertisers are looking for. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a first stab at it. And actually, I'll take a look at it maybe from the perspective of an advertiser, because I am an advertiser. We advertise. We spend a lot of money advertising our content. And as an advertiser, so here's sort of the first thing I'll say, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this in a room of a couple hundred people, but as an advertiser, we spend more money on digital platforms than on linear platforms. That's the way we reach 18 to 34-year-old guys. But as an advertiser, I recognize there are some things you buy that you lock in and you're stuck with and you can't really change, and then there's other things you buy that you can change and you can move on. And so when we buy, you know, a Funny or Die homepage on the day of something that we're launching, I know I can't move that. I know that's locked. But when we buy Twitter, we spend a lot of money with Twitter. We are literally adjusting our targeting on Twitter, money we're spending against different groups, and we hyper-target on all these platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and others. And those we are adjusting literally on the fly. So as an advertiser, I understand there's some things we buy where we have to lock in, and then I also understand there's some things that are more flexible, and that's okay. That's fine. Just as long as I know that up front, I'm going in. And that's certainly different, I think, than, again, even 5 years ago when almost everything you bought, you had to commit up front and you were stuck.
And I would just add that I think our advertisers have very different expectations of their buys on linear now than they used to. They used to buy a show, and if it was a top 10 show, they felt even better about it, and they were kind of with you for the run. And there was this sort of sense of pride of being with a big show, and the fact that they knew that there was probably a certain number of adults, 25 to 54, watching that show was sort of enough. You know, Google and Twitter and YouTube, they've like shot millions of miles past us in what they can tell an advertiser now about that audience. And so the challenge is back on us to figure out how not only measuring, but precisely measuring and targeting for a unique audience, because the advertiser now is more interested in understanding the who as opposed to the show. So we still need really big shows that deliver really big audiences, but the who that's watching them is what the advertiser's interested in. So they just don't want adults 25-54, they want, you know, moms between the ages of 25 and 29 who have shopped at Target in the last, 3 weeks, and that's just a plug for Target because my daughter works there. But that's what. And so they're interested in knowing way more about it. And if you can't deliver that kind of detailed information, that's where our challenge will be. We've got the properties that are massively enjoyed by huge audiences. I still think we do a really great job at that, but we aren't delivering the detail for targeted advertising that the advertiser's now expecting and can get on these other platforms.
And I'd argue that's why this is such an exciting time. I fully agree with your earlier point, Barb, that TV content's fantastic. It's gotten a lot better in the last 5 years as well. And now that we are moving as an industry to all IP, we can all do this kind of measurement the advertising community expects. It also benefits the broadcasters. We're now in a world where you could deploy your marketing at audiences you know you can sell at the highest price. So rather than get an 18 to 34-year-old, let's get an auto intender on my website that I can sell at $50 CPM rather than 10. So that's the big positive for me with all of this disruption that's happening.
There was a question back here, I think. Yep.
Hi. I don't think there's very much time left, so I'm going to make it a quick question. Jeremy, you mentioned that this is a very good time for Canadian creative people to get into this space, and I was wondering if you could elaborate and tell us what it is specifically about Canadians and Canadian market that you are so hopeful about. Thank you.
I'm a nerd. I look at data, and the data tells me. I mean, it's all of you who can tell me what makes this place so special. But you know, the data tells me that if you take all of the content produced in Canada, whether that's a creator distributing it, or whether that might be someone like a Blue Ant that's a broadcaster going global, or Out TV or others, we rank top 5 in the world on YouTube. And that's just a stunning stat, given we're a country of, 33, 34 million people. So that's what the data tells me. You know, why? You know, I think we have a wonderful community with a government that recognizes the importance of the content industry and invests. I hope they continue to invest. It's something that's on my mind a lot, particularly in Ontario right now. You know, and I think that government's realizing the opportunities now to help people go global. I think we have also an industry that meets, you know, small is good. You know, I spent a lot of time growing up listening to grunge music. I hate using that term, but if you talk to the Pearl Jams of the day, what they said worked so well is that they all collaborated with each other in Seattle. That's why that scene went global so well. So I think the fact that we have events like this are so important as well. But the bigger message is, yeah, there's a world out there. Pick your, not your niche, your hyper niche within that. Think big and go for it.
You know, and then you add you know, it is generally an English language business. We speak English. It's generally a language driven largely on the back of the American studios, so it's content that looks sort of like America. Well, we do that. You know, we've got all the tools here. It's really quite amazing. In fact, a producer was telling me recently that they did an analysis. They decided, as part of their business in the scripted world, they wanted to understand, they made a list of all the buyers in the world today who can pay at least $1 million an hour. And their list came to 72 homes. There's 72 places in the world that will today pay $1 million at least for an hour of television. That's remarkable, because I don't think the list was more than 20 not so long ago. So the opportunity's all there. Peter, you want to add something on that?
I want that list.
You could figure it out in 15 minutes. Were there more questions? About 10 minutes ago, I was told, oh, we have 5 minutes. Any more questions? It's a good time just to open it up. Back here?
Just quickly to the panel, we're talking about this brave new world. What are your views about where the state broadcaster fits in that new everything that's going on with CBC?
Kirstine, you want to try that one? Are you done with that?
It's been a year.
Anybody have a take on the role of...
Let's just talk about Canadian programming, because I think that's what's important in this context, because I think sometimes, you know, we do talk about the fact that there's, I remember at the CBC someone throwing at us the number of Canadian content hours that were on YouTube being so much more than what CBC could ever produce. That would probably be true, but it's a different kind of content, right? I think in terms of Canadian content and the kind of successes that we're seeing now, the highlight for me last week, and I hope I don't misquote it, but was at your upfront, and Barb announced it. The top 10 shows on HGTV are all Canadian.
Yes,
Wow,
they are.
that's amazing.
Yes, they are.
And
I think I went on to say that there's not another channel out there with any other broadcast company that could even come close.
there you go. But so I think, I think
Just saying.
I think we need to look at Canadian content holistically, because I think if we silo one particular broadcaster in that, and so many of them do it so well, not all are incentivized or maybe motivated as much to do it as the CBC necessarily is, but we need an entire ecosystem for it to work, because it can't all lay in one place. So luckily we have places like Global and Shaw, where Barb is obviously investing in this. The more people who do, I think is going to be incredibly important, because we need that ecosystem to develop new people who are then going to be supplying myself and Facebook and Google with product. Like, I think we need to think about this as an overall system and not some kind of one place that has a responsibility. I think there's a shared responsibility amongst all broadcasters who benefit from being here in Canada.
And that ecosystem, just to put a plug in for it, I think has done a tremendous job at building and supporting a creative industry that's making more and better content today than it ever has. And there is a real cycle to it, as we know. There is in that traditional ecosystem, there is regulated revenue that calculates out to a CPE, that is that that content expenditure that as broadcasters we all commit to spending on our Canadian content and then broadcasting it and supporting it, and it's really worked really well. So I think one of the challenges in this great brave new world with all these platforms and all these opportunities for content is to make sure that we still have a robust enough system, however inclusive and however we include all these other new platforms, we have a robust enough system that still drives that engine of good creative that's financially supported, marketed, and put out there for people to find and enjoy. Because at the heart of our success today, I think, is a lot of that ecosystem that we want to be a little careful about opening up too quickly.
I think we're that's a good one to end on, and we're out of time anyway. So thanks all. Thank you, panelists. That was great.
Thank you.